phenomenology is the fact that in the center of my vision, my hands are very clear, and then out in the periphery, they disappear. And phenomenology is the way things smell and the way things taste and the fact that they matter. And so you could say in some sense that phenomenology is the study of what matters rather than matter. And it's a given from the phenomenological perspective that things have meaning. And you know, even if you're a rationalist, say, and a cynic and a nihilist, and you say, well, nothing has any meaning, you still run into the problem of pain, because pain undercuts your arguments and has a meaning. So there's no escaping from the meaning. You can pretty much demolish all the positive parts of it, but trying to think your way out of the negative parts, man, good luck with that, because that just doesn't work. So phenomenology is, and the Bible stories, and I think this is true of fiction in general, is phenomenological. And it concentrates on trying to elucidate the nature of human experience, and that is not the same as the objective world. But it's also a form of truth, because it is truth that you have a field of experience and that it has qualities. The question is, what are the qualities? Now, ancient representations of reality were sort of a weird meld of observable phenomena, things that we would consider objective facts, and subjective truth, the projection of subjective truth. And I'll show you, for example, I'll show you how the Mesopotamians viewed the world. They had a model. Basically, the world was a disc. You know, if you go out in a field at night, what does the world look like? Well, it's a disc. It's got a dome on top of it. Well, that was basically the Mesopotamian view of the world, and the view of the world that the people who wrote the first stories in the Bible believed too. And on top of the dome there was water. Well, obviously, it's like it rains, right? Where does the water come from? Well, there's water around the dome. And then there's land, that's the disc, and then underneath that there's water. Now, how do you know that? Well, drill. You'll hit water. Well, it's under the earth, obviously, because otherwise how would you hit the water? And then what's under that? There's fresh water. And then what's under that? Well, if you go to the edge of the disc, you hit the ocean. It's salt water. So it's a dome with water outside of it. And then it's a disc that the dome sits on. And then underneath that, there's fresh water. And then underneath that, there's salt water. And that was roughly the Mesopotamian world. And you see that's a mix of observation and imagination, right? Because that isn't the world, but it is the way the world appears. It's a perfectly believable cosmology. And the sun rises and the sun sets on that dome. It's not like the thing is bloody well spinning. Who would ever think that up? It's obviously the sun comes up and goes down and then travels underneath the world and comes back up again. There's nothing more self-evident than that. Well, that's that strange intermingling of subjective fantasy, let's say, right at the level of perception and actual observable phenomena. And a lot of the cosmology that's associated with the biblical stories is exactly like that. It's half psychology and half reality, although the psychological is real as well. So that, and to know that the biblical stories have a phenomenological truth is really worth knowing, because, you know, the poor fundamentalists, they're trying to cling to their moral structure, and, you know, I understand why. Because it does organize their societies and it organizes their psyche, so they've got something to cling to, but, you know, they don't have a very sophisticated idea of the complexity of what constitutes truth, and they try to gerrymander the biblical stories into the domain of scientific theory, you know, promoting creationism, for example, as an alternative scientific theory. It's like that just isn't going to go anywhere, you know, because the people who wrote these damn stories weren't scientists to begin with. There weren't any scientists back then. There's hardly any scientists now. You know, it's hard to think scientifically, man. It's like it takes a lot of training, and even scientists don't think scientifically once you get them out of the lab, and hardly even when they're in the lab. You know, you got to get peer reviewed and criticized, and like it's hard to think scientifically. So, and however the people who wrote these stories thought was more like dramatists think, more like Shakespeare thought, but that doesn't mean that there isn't truth in it. It just means that you have to be a little bit more sophisticated about your ideas of truth. And that's okay, you know. There are truths to live by. Okay, well, fine. Then we want to figure out what those are, because we need to live and maybe not to suffer so much.